Tutors, mentors, and the city with your host.com.
The City Tutors presents
Tutors, mentors, and the city
with your host.com.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Kevin.com Brown, and welcome to Tutors, Mentors, and the City. So here we go. We're going to jump right in. Please help me welcome our guest for this episode, and I hope I don't mess up the last name, Miss Alice Twombly. Yay! Did I get it right?
Many people get it wrong.
Yes, as soon as I saw it, I was like, oh, I know I'm going to mess this up. But I'm glad I got it right on my first try. So nice to meet you, Alice, and thank you so much for joining us this episode. Now,
My pleasure.
question. Now, I don't know if you did any research on us, but I'm gonna tell you what. The way I do my interviews, I do no research. Okay, I get to know you at the same moment that our viewers are getting to know you. Okay. So that being said, I'm going to ask you some questions that if I were familiar with you, they might sound ignorant, but since I'm not, they're going to be informative for me and for us. All right. Now, that being said, I'm fascinated by names and their origins. Okay. So your name is Twombly.
Right.
Okay. What is the origin of that name?
That is a very good question. And it is not my name. It's my ex-husband's name. Okay. But it's been my name for my professional life since I got married in 1963. And it's my children's names. So since we kept that, I've done a lot of research on the name Twombly. It's a historic name in the United States. So the first Twombly, a man named Ralph Twombly, came to America in about 1650 or a little earlier. And my former husband and my late father-in-law did extensive research on the family. So they settled in Dover, New Hampshire. And in the 1930s, in the New Deal, during the New Deal, the Roosevelt government sent out people all over the United States to research towns, every town in America, and take its history. In this research, the town of Dover, New Hampshire is one of the towns, and you can open up that town and look at where people got land. And you can see the land that in 1653 was given to Ralph Twombly. So he's the single progenitor of that name in the United States.
Wow.
And there's a very famous painter named Cy Twombly, whose work is all over New York, who's part of the Ashcan School of Painting. And anytime I'd meet somebody, they said, oh, I know that name because of Cy Twombly. But it's a name terribly mispronounced. And it's my children's name and my grandchildren's name. Okay. I have one more fact to tell you about it, because I could talk extensively, but you can keep asking me questions.
No, go ahead.
Okay. So the name, I was once at a party and somebody came up to me and said, you know the origin of that name? I said, no. The origin of the name is Twemlow, Twemlow. And I looked it up, and it was a place name. It meant two as in Twombly, or twin. Twem was two, and low, L-O-W, meant valley. So I was in England, and I wanted to see, because I knew that the Twomblys had come from England, if I could find out anything. Long story short, I was in a town, and the town's name was Ludlow. I said, oh, there you get the low, the valley. So these people sent me to the Guildhall London Library, where research on every single town in England exists on microfiche. So I said, oh, I'm never going to do this. I'm never going to go there. It's my vacation. And I'm in London. I walk right past the Guildhall libraries. this has to be, I should walk through the door. So I went in and I found 11 pages of microfiche going back to the Norman conquest in 1066. And there was Sir Lyle de Twemlow with a map of his land, where it was located. And so my son has done a lot more research, and he's gone beyond the Norman conquest of England over to France, where the Twemlows came from. So that's the end of that story. I am Jewish. I have no history past 100 years ago in the United States. So that's the story.
Well, that is fascinating. That's fascinating. I'm fascinated by the origin of last names. So, Twombly, Alice Twombly, who are you?
I am a grandmother. Maybe I shouldn't start there. I'm a school teacher. I'm a poet. I'm 82 years old and I still teach. I have Zoom classes that I teach for a place called the Learning Collaborative in Rockland County, which is a senior citizen learning center where I have taught for many years, and we had to go on Zoom when the pandemic hit. And so I'm very familiar with working on Zoom. And when we went on Zoom, I was teaching poetry class, and I decided to continue teaching it, and it has evolved into a weekly poetry class. I teach poetry, and I'm not writing at this point. So I have a group of really amazing students who are in their 80s and 90s, or 70s, 80s, 90s, who meet with me every Friday for 1.5 to 2 hours, and I select poems for them to read. And they said, I got them through Trump, I got them through the election, I got them through the pandemic, and but also regionally. So when Black Lives Matter came up, I did a whole history or a whole array of African-American poets. And one of my favorites is somebody named Kevin Young. You know Kevin Young?
I do not.
Oh, well, you should. Kevin Young is now the director of the African-American Museum in the Smithsonian. He used to be in the Schomburg Center. And he also is an incredible poet who wrote a book called Brown. And it's about all the impact of the Brown decision. Many, many poems about the homegoing of going down. One whole poem is called Money, and it's all about tracing the Trail of Emmett Till. He has hip hop in it. He has musical poems in it. He is, if you want to start anywhere on a contemporary American poet, read Kevin Young and get the book Brown, and then read it, and you'll remember your days of hanging out with hip hop and what people did when they went to skate rinks and all that stuff. And the poetry, this whole section called Money. It is like my number one book to recommend to people to read is Brown by Kevin Young.
Wow. Okay.
So I do everything. Right now, I'm going to be giving a lecture at the Teaneck Library in a month on the current poet laureate of the United States. Her name is Anna Limon. She's the first Latin poet laureate of the United States. She's written some pretty amazing poetry. So a lot of my life work, when I'm not kind of like saying, why do I have to do the dishes right now, is teaching poetry, teaching literature, teaching online. And I'm a writer. I run a poetry reading group. We have poets come out to New Jersey and have a monthly poetry reading that got defunct by the pandemic. It's coming back. It's called Thursdays Off of Poetry. And then I do stuff like that.
Wow. It's so incredible that you are mentioning this today. I just started writing poetry.
Uh-huh. Good
Yeah.
job. Good.
And it's funny, I just shared 2 pieces with Gary yesterday.
Okay.
For our viewers, Gary's the executive director of the City Tutors. He's the
Right, of
creator
course.
and the boss of City Tutors for any of our viewers. And City Tutors is a not-for-profit volunteer tutoring service and volunteer mentoring service. And we provide a free service to underserved communities, students, grads, undergrads, English second language, anything you need help with. City Tutors handles that, but it's not for profit. So anyway, I shared with him 2 of my pieces yesterday. And so it's funny you mentioned Kevin Young, because the 2 pieces that I wrote are based on my return to school. I just got my degree in Black Studies, my bachelor's degree in Black Studies.
Oh, fantastic.
2 years ago, right? So it's interesting for me to whenever I speak to someone like yourself, who's knowledgeable about the genre of poetry, I try to pick, I try to see if I can pick up a few crumbs of advice, because I don't feel right calling it poetry, because mine sound like lyrics. Mine sound like rap lyrics. They flow, they can fit on a beat, they sound real, they sound real fly. But poetry doesn't have to rhyme. So I feel like I'm not even qualified to call it that.
Don't say that. My sister, I come from a family of poets. My sister B is gotten an honorary doctorate from the Marlborough College for her work in poetry. She is a traveling poet in the state of Vermont. She's earned her living being a poet.
Wow.
I have a musical family. And my sister Evie is a singer, and we were raised in a family. I have an elder brother who died, but we were all raised with music and whatever. But what I can say about the rhyme is do what you feel comfortable with, number one. But go read Kevin Young and pick up a book of his, or just Google him, and I'll tell you how to find him. So go on poetryfoundation.org. Okay, poetry, you can do it right now as we're talking. Poetryfoundation.org, and type in Kevin Young. Okay, and poetryfoundation.org publishes Poetry Magazine, which is one of the oldest poetry magazines in the United States. And what they have, if they publish anybody's poem, and because Kevin Young was so well known, they have a whole biography of him, and then they'll have sample poems. If they've published them, a poem by him in Poetry Magazine, you can read his whole body, a body of work that they published. And there'll be many references to Kevin. So when you get to see his stuff and see what he writes, his book called Brown is, if I said, where am I going to start? I'm going to start by going to the library, or going and buying the book for myself, because you don't want to mark it up. Go on Amazon and get Brown by Kevin Young. And you'll see what a master does. He uses rhyme. And he also writes a history. He writes the history of a young man growing up. One of the things that really appealed to me, my son, David, is about to be 50. Kevin Young is 49. And he went to Harvard. He was a buddy. He writes about, he knows these other poets. I mean, he comes from the school of poetry. His family comes from Kansas City, so he was all familiar with the Brown decision. And he writes about some of my son, David, who is a real hip hop fan. We grew up in Englewood. We were a minority white family in the city of Englewood. My kids are always minorities in school, white minorities. I was the last white person to buy a house on my street 50 years ago. So this is my territory, sort of.
Okay.
And I taught in Teaneck, which is the next town over from Englewood. Now, guess who I live around the corner from? The Isley Brothers, Sylvia Robinson. Hip hop started around the corner from my house. So it's our neighborhood. It's our neighborhood.
Yes. Those are legendary names. Those
The
are legendary
names are right here. They just named around the corner the street after the Isley Brothers. They had
yes. Well, I'm a amend your statement a little bit, right? So the Isley Brothers, legends, iconic, all that kind of stuff. I was a young lad when Sylvia Rohn signed was it Sylvia Rohn or Sylvia Robinson? Am I mixing names?
Robinson, her name is
Yes,
Robinson.
Sylvia Robinson, yes. I was a young lad when Sylvia Robinson signed the Sugar Hill Gang, right?
Right, and they lived around the corner from me.
And they were all from Teaneck. Now, thank you for refreshing my memory.
Teaneck and Englewood. Some of the Isleys lived in Teaneck. I taught Tia Isley.
Okay.
And some of the Isleys, Mama Isley, her house is around the corner, across the street from Sylvia Robinson.
Right.
But, I know my neighborhood.
Yes. But that being said,
Platters, Clyde McFadder lived across the street from me before I moved here. When I moved here, my former husband was teaching African American history at City College. Then he actually is an architectural historian. He taught at the graduate school. But when Gary, to just skipped over, was a senior in my English class, in my AP English class, his mother wanted him to go to Baruch. He was a brilliant English student. And I said, because of the fact that his mother was from Russia and they came as immigrants here and they were making their way here, I suggested that Gary apply to the city. He'd have a better, broader education. So he did. And from day one, I followed what he did. I knew about the creation of city tutors. I knew it. He was taking 400 courses a semester. This guy was eating school. He was eating school. I once visited him. I actually went to City College to have lunch with him a couple of years ago. So he's my bud. And
big ups to Gary, big ups to Sylvia Robinson, big ups to the Isley family. But let's get back to you. Where were you born? Okay. Where are you from? I was born in New York City. That was only for 10 minutes because my mother went to a hospital in New York City. Okay, you're talking about Manhattan.
And my parents were living in North Bergen, New Jersey.
Okay, North Bergen. All right.
And so we lived in North Bergen until my parents bought a house in Palisades Park, New Jersey. My dad had a clothing factory in Hoboken, New Jersey. He manufactured little kids' cowboy suits and outerwear. And with his 6 brothers and 1 sister, they had a clothing factory in Hoboken called Jacobs Brothers. That's my maiden name. So my mom and dad bought this house in Palisades Park, New Jersey, which was largely Italian. Not too many Jewish families there, although there was a synagogue. And it had a pretty bad school system. So my parents built a house in Teaneck in 1953. And there's a lot of stories about that, which I won't get into right now. And we moved to Teaneck. So I was in the middle of 8th grade then. And I started at Teaneck High School. By that time, my brother had graduated from Leonia High School, had gone to MIT, and was in his 2nd or 3rd year of college. So I have 2 siblings, younger than I. And so we moved to this house in Teaneck. And I went to Teaneck High School, graduated. And from there, I went to Brandeis University in Waltham, Massachusetts. And then I went to the Harvard Graduate School of Education and got my master's in teaching. And by that time, I got married and moved out to Wisconsin, where my ex-husband was getting his PhD at the University of Wisconsin. And I taught school there I started teaching in September of 1963. Oh, and I was this radical Easterner in this brand new Midwestern school. Oh, I was the only Jewish person in the school of 1,500 people. People didn't know I was Jewish. I would hear anti-Semitic comments from the students and stuff like that. 4 weeks after I started teaching, I was teaching civics in the 9th grade. I didn't know that much about Wisconsin government, but I learned a lot about it. 4 weeks after I started teaching was the Birmingham church bombing. I went to a rally and there was a Nazi parading up and down the street. So that was an eye-opener. And then 2 months after I started teaching, Kennedy was assassinated while I was teaching. I was teaching about government. I was teaching about Kennedy's election. And the class ends and somebody runs into my classroom and says, Kennedy's been assassinated.
Oh my goodness.
And that was heavy duty, as you can imagine.
Yeah, I can't imagine. I can imagine. Yes.
And teaching 9th graders about this. And then right after I got married was the March on Washington. I got to Wisconsin 2 days before the March on Washington, and I was ready to jump on the bus to go to DC. My family members went to the March on Washington, my brother, my sisters. And I would have gone there if it hadn't been 1,000 miles away from where I was. I was a civil rights activist in college, and my brother was as well. My brother was arrested and put in jail for trying to integrate restaurants. And so we came from this political family. So I taught school. After 5 months after I started teaching, the Beatles came. It transformed everybody I was teaching. And, just like the arrival of hip hop in the Bronx, everybody got changed. All the boys started wearing hair like this. And so it was pretty turbulent times. And I taught until 1968. The last day of school that I taught, the last year of school I taught, Martin Luther King was assassinated. And the last day I taught, Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So you imagine yourself as a 9th grader. In the school I taught 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And I taught for 5 years. The first class that I taught, I'm still in touch with. They are 72 years old.
Oh,
My
wow.
former and grandparents. And I'm in touch with a lot of them. I went out to their 50th reunion.
Well, that says a lot. That says a lot for you. And those were terrible, terrible times, turbulent times. Dr. King was actually assassinated on my birthday.
Oh no!
And I'm a baby. I'm young, right? But I remember my mother sending me to the room. You know, you send the kid to the room so you can get the cake out and put the candles and get everybody ready to sing. So I go to the room, babe. Go to your room, baby. So okay, I go to the room, but I come out to go to the bathroom, and I see my mother crying in the hallway. And I remember this. I don't have a lot of memories from being that young, but I remember seeing her crying in the hallway and my aunt consoling her. So as a kid, when you see your mom crying on your birthday, of course, I thought I did something wrong.
Right.
I had no idea what was happening in the world politically. I thought it was me, but it scarred me, right? That was my own personal, a kid, you never know what a kid's going to hold on to.
Sure, absolutely.
But I held on to that, and I knew it was my birthday. And it fazed me forever until I found out, later in life, connecting the dots, that was the event that was making my mother cry. Because she never told me. She just said, no, nothing's wrong. Go back to your room, baby. But amazing. This interview is not about me, but the amazing part is, so my mother 2 years ago now passed away on my birthday too.
Oh, dear me.
right? So Dr. King, my mother, I don't look at my birthdays the same anymore. It's not a day to celebrate me at all. Like when so many valuable, most important, these might have been, these might be the two most important people in my life, right?
True.
The
Wow.
impact Dr. King made on society and the impact my mother made on my life. And both of these things happened on my birthday, but that was quite a time for you, right? That was quite a time. Kennedy was 63.
You're right. When that was,
JFK,
wow. Of course, it changed everything.
everything.
And there was the Vietnam War. I had some of my students went off to get their goop. They were being educated. This all-white school, 2 Black kids, 1 Jew, and 1,500 people in this school. But this is a university town, and it was the capital of the state of Wisconsin. So the university was one part of town, and my students' parents had fought in the Korean War, and they were veterans from the Korean War. And our school was built on a golf course. It was the first new school in 33 years, high school, and we had so many facilities and things like that you couldn't believe. But there were these kids who came from these farming backgrounds. They were Lutherans, they were Catholics, they were Scandinavian, they were German, and they had never seen anything like it. And think about the populations. I mean, there was already 10 years of the civil rights movement by 1964. I came out to teach my students about the civil rights movement. And when the first day hit, my hotshot 23-year-old, just married, traveling around with this strange name, Twombly, that doesn't belong to me. On the very first day of school, chaos in a brand new school, nobody knew. Had a class size of 70 people the first day. They didn't know what to do with the enrollment. And I get up to the blackboard and I said, here's your homework. The rest of school, every single day.
Wow.
It was to read an article about the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
That was my homework assignment.
Yeah.
Smart ass white girl. And later on, it was something similar to what I had to do in high school, which was to read newspaper articles when I went to TNEC and write summaries on it. It was a way to teach writing. Read an article, write it in your own words, put it in a binder, give it to the teacher at the end of the week. 150 students. I was grading their papers of 150 students. So, so one day on the parents' night, and here I am, the stranger, this strange New York accent, which you can't pick up, right? And so a parent comes in and says to me, is every school teaching the civil rights movement? Don't you think it's a communist plot? They're accusing me of being a communist for teaching the civil rights movement. So that's kind of my history.
Right.
And so when I left teaching in 1968, I went back to get, I had a master's already. I went to the University of Wisconsin to get a master's degree in history. And I was pregnant. My ex-husband was teaching there for 1 year as a professor. And the school went on strike for Black studies. The school was in turmoil. There were these Black studies riots, people trying to get Black studies be accepted on campus. And there were tear gas bombing going around the school. We had helicopters flying over the city of Madison. We had people on half tracks, armed soldiers going through the town when I was pregnant, because of the struggles of students resisting sit-ins and trying to get Black studies as an accepted department at the University of Wisconsin. So you see what Ron DeSantis is showing with the AP tests in African American history and rejecting it as not authentic scholarship.
Wow. You touch my heart. You touch my heart. I did an interview with a gentleman, Alan Hershkowitz, and he said some powerful things to me. I never met him. I only met him on Zoom, and we met like I'm meeting you. And he said some very powerful things to me that made me emotional. And I didn't see it coming, and I commented on it throughout the interview. But you did the same thing. I did not know or did not connect the dots, let's say, on when I came and got my degree, and I got it in Black Studies.
Right.
It was by advice from an advisor who I had never met before, a white woman who I met on Zoom. And I told her I wanted to be a theater major, and she discouraged me from that because I'm a pretty successful actor, relatively successful actor, and I didn't need to take the theater. She said I could teach those classes. She said I should consider Black Studies. I didn't see it was by design. I didn't even recognize her purpose. I didn't question her purpose. I just said, well, if it'll help me get my degree, then let's do it. But when you tell me the backstory of the fighting, the resistance, the lack of acceptance, it touches my heart. It touches my heart deep inside, because my eyes are watering a little bit. But after I cried on that episode with Alan, I'm not going to cry anymore, right? But I didn't know this was a major that had to be fought for. I didn't know it was thing like that.
Do a little research on it. And what happened was, there were sit-ins for a variety of reasons all over the place. But when I was in college and in Waltham, Massachusetts, so that's where Brandeis is, my brother, who lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts, organized, we had protested the Woolworths in town, because that's where the sit-ins in the South were occurring, where people started sitting in at the counters at Woolworths, and there was a northern movement to do it. So on Saturdays, I'd go into Cambridge, meet up with my brother, be on protests to get Woolworths to be integrated. And the irony of that is that my dad and my uncles manufactured children's clothing, inexpensive children's clothing. His biggest client was Woolworths. So my brother and I are picketing Woolworths to give support to the South, biting the hand that fed them, kind of. But my brother was a president of CORE. He had a whole history of that, but this was part of what my family did. We were white radicals, not that radical, but we were right, really political people in our family. And we went picketing right before I got married. My ex-husband and I joined my brother in a picket line, integrating a swimming pool that was in a country club not far from here. And we got spat on. This car was in a convertible. The guy in a convertible was driving down the dirt road we were walking on as a path into the swimming pool, and he almost dinged us.
Mm.
And, that's what I did before I got married.
Mm.
So when I was in Wisconsin, aside from teaching civil rights every day, or trying to do it, I had to modify it a little bit. I was the educational chairman of the Civil Rights Commission of the city of Madison for a period of time. One of my fellow teachers said, you should do this. So it's a long history. I moved to Englewood because I wanted my kids to go to an integrated school system. And my family, I'm not unique, but my decision-making has been governed by wanting to make America truer to its roots.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm going to unpack a couple of things you mentioned. Now, you were in the process, we went on a little tangent, but you were in the process of saying, so you went back to school to get a second master's degree. And then what happened?
So that was in American history.
Right.
And at that time, my husband was teaching a course, and one of the students who was in my seminar was taking my husband's class. My husband's really radical. He is a socialist historian right now. Nobody was working. There were only 4 people in my seminar. And when I wrote my master's thesis on the Brown decision. I was doing this research, did a lot of research on the Brown decision. And when I presented my paper, one person turned to me and said, "You really worked." I thought, what the hell are you talking about? Here I watched my husband write his PhD. I read over the whole text, and I'm trying to follow what I saw him do for 5 years as a scholar. And I write this paper. I did all the research to write my master's thesis on the Brown decision. But I was pregnant and I had morning sickness. And I didn't realize I wasn't always going to feel this way. And I dropped out of school and I didn't go back. And I did not get the second master's degree. But I have all the notes to write the rest of my part of the master's degree took us up to the decision. I started out with the decision, and I went through all the steps, all the 5 cases that led up to the Brown decision.
Right.
And then it was called resolution and reaction. And really, my thesis was on what allowed the resistance to develop. And I thought, why was in 2 years that it took to end for the decision when they knew what was coming? The school systems in the South were already trying to get better because they didn't want to have to integrate, and they were doing this fast and furious stuff. And so I thought that the time delay between the decision and the implementation enabled white citizens councils and all of these resistances to develop, to resist the integration and to then create warfare in the South. Maybe I was naive at the time because it would have happened. But I mean, so I'm doing my thesis on the Brown decision. And, you can see it's in my blood.
Mm-hmm. So with that question, I've never been in a position to ask this question I'm about to ask, but I may have had the flash of a thought. The story of Black people in this country and Jewish people in this country, atrocities, horrible atrocities. And I know in reading history and being a Black studies student, there were a lot of Jewish people who were prominent in the civil rights movement.
Absolutely.
Now, that being said, if I guess I'm trying to formulate a question, but I don't want it to be too specific. I want you to take your response wherever you want it to go. But what attracted Jewish people who had their own problems, right? What attracted them to this movement? What attracted y'all to this movement?
I think, today we can look at a lot of difference between the Jewish struggle and the African-American struggle or third world struggles somehow or other. Unfortunately, wealth and other privileges have caused a diversion, but it is really at the heart of Judaism is an expression that says, "Welcome the stranger." And I think that the idea of Jewish justice is so powerful. One of the things that's happened to me in my older life is to become a part of a synagogue, which when I was a kid, I was like not there. But I read a lot of at the holiday of Yom Kippur. There is a very long statement about fasting which is primary on Yom Kippur. And so there is a section that starts out by saying, this is the fast that I want. My fast is to feed the hungry. It starts right off with this, and you can look it up. There's a whole section in which you have, I don't want to call it a confession, but it's a statement of belief. This is the fast I desire when I am fasting on Yom Kippur. And it is something that it's in my heart. This is the fast I desire. And it's to do justice. And it is so imbued in Jewish life, even though you don't necessarily see it as such, but in what is not questionable. It's not questioned. My sisters and I, my brother, we took this to heart. And it is something every year I kind of renew my pledge to do this. So I think that was going back to the immigrant experience. I think that there was an alliance that went way back. If you know the founding of the NAACP, which you have read about in your Black Studies, one of the founders is a man named Spingarn, who was Jewish. And I think there was a feeling that Blacks and Jews had common cause. One of the things I have learned from my teaching experience with Black people and African Americans and doing my own reading is that there's a divergence. The experience of slavery of African Americans is nothing similar. It's not, that's the wrong word. The Holocaust is one thing, and a lifetime of history of the persecution of the Jews, going back to the Middle Ages, going back to history, is a different type of persecution than the persecution of African Americans. But the heart is similar. The heart for justice is similar. So that's where I would put that now. I mean, and my own children, my son who lives in Cambridge, my son David, his wife, and my granddaughters have been on picket lines since before they were born. They're out there. They're on labor. They're on the labor side. My niece Una, who lives in Brooklyn, is a labor organizer. She works with the construction workers union, Union 79. She's out in the streets every day. I mean, nobody said, Una, why don't you go and do this? My sister V, who's a poet, was with Nicole Hannah, I keep getting her name wrong, the person who wrote the 1619 Project.
Yeah.
She was in a lecture with her, and the person who was giving a talk, Gay Talese, made a kind of racist comment. My sister challenged him. And later on, she became famous and got into the New York Times for being with Nicole Hannah. What's her last name?
Jones,
right, of course. Where Gay Talese made a slur to her. And my sister made the New York Times as the woman who challenged Gay Talese. So she got press all over. I mean, she didn't need more press, but she got press all over the place. That's who we are. We're people with a mouth. That's the alliance of the Jews with the African Americans. Maybe.
Okay. Fascinating tale. So, okay, you didn't finish that master's. You were pregnant. You dropped out. But I know, even though you dropped out, you didn't wander around aimlessly, right? No. So you had the baby.
I did.
And then what was happening in your mind?
My ex-husband got a job at City College. So we moved back east, as they would say when I lived in Wisconsin. You move back east. So I moved back east, and we lived in Fair Lawn, and then we bought a house a year later. And my son was, Jonathan was a year old at that time. We bought this house in Englewood. And I still live in that same house, but I'm not married to the same guy.
Okay, so let me jump in for a second.
Sure.
So Inglewood, very, very prestigious neighborhood now, right?
Not, well, it depends on where you live.
Okay, so I know that Eddie Murphy moved to Inglewood. Eddie Murphy
Right. I know
Eddie
his
Murphy
house.
made $1 billion and he moved to Inglewood. So let me ask you this. You said you came back east in what year?
1969.
Okay, so what did the property that's worth millions now? What was it worth in 69, 60,
I'll
70?
tell you something interesting. You can see, can you see the background of my house?
Yes.
Can you see? Okay, so this is a one-story house. And I'm going to walk around with my laptop a little bit so you can see it, because it's a unique house. It's not like, I'm going to show you. It's all glass.
Ah, okay. Yes.
With ceiling. It's a one-floor house. It has a living room, dining room connected. That's my living room. And this is now it's an African-American neighborhood. It was not. My neighbors are not only African-American, they're from Africa, they're from Haiti, they're from Jamaica.
Beautiful, beautiful home. In 1970, what was a place like that?
Okay, so I paid $37,000 for this house.
Wow!
With a 9% mortgage.
What?
Yeah. The mortgages went up to 18% at the beginning of the Reagan administration. Mortgages were 18%. Now, because of my neighborhood and because of, in a way, the quality of this house, my house is now worth about, on a good day, about $350,000. But if I lived in Tenafly, I have a third of an acre of land around here too. I have like a big backyard and stuff. If there were 29 houses that look like my house in this neighborhood, if my house were a half a mile over in Tenafly, it would be worth $8,000 or $100,000. But it is a red-lined neighborhood. So I was the last white person to buy. I didn't know this until a couple of years ago. And here is what the realtor said to me. Now, this is the most shocking thing I'm going to say. So this realtor drove me around looking for houses. Nothing satisfied me. You have to realize my ex-husband is an architectural historian. I have always loved architecture. So the guy is desperate to show me a house, and he takes me down this kind of ramshackle street, and he gets me to in front of this house, and he says, "Well, it's a kind of strange house." He said, "I'm going to take you to a house in a colored neighborhood. You look like the type." How many people have ever told you that's what a realtor said to a client? So wow. He said, there's a kitchen front door. It was very weird. There was a fourth bedroom in the basement, blah, blah, blah. I was not going to look at it. It was driving me away. So my ex-husband was like driving around. He was waiting for me to make up my mind. He's on a business. Make up your damn mind. We had friends in Englewood who taught at City College that we were just meeting. They were trying to keep it integrated, and they were trying to get white families to move to Englewood when it was actually, a lot of Englewood was turning over to Black families. It always had a Black population. So they said, we have a friend who lives on that street. they took me down the other end where my friend Ellen Bindman lived, who taught in the Sikh program at City College. And she was a white woman with a black boyfriend with 3 kids. And her house was gorgeous. And they took me around the other way and took me in the real front entrance. And I walked in and I said, this is it. But the house was ramshackle. Well, then I realized I had been in this house before a number of years ago. Why? I was at a Congress of Racial Equality meeting in this house.
Wow.
And there had been a school boycott in Englewood, and 100 parents moved their kids from school. And the houses were used as school. So I'm already moving into a house with a civil rights history. And my son, Jonathan, who went to Harvard, wrote his undergraduate thesis on desegregation and the resegregation of the Englewood school system, which he had experienced.
Yes.
It goes to the next generation here, living in this house. And I only recently found out about 2 years ago when I mentioned this fact that no white family since I moved here had ever bought a house. There were many Jewish families here and some eminent African Americans when I moved in. But I was the last white person. And that's because I didn't realize this had been a red line part of Englewood.
Now, when you say this was a red line, that's a real estate term. What does that mean when you say
it means don't show houses past this line? They drew a red line around these neighborhoods. Then they did something called real estate testing. Real estate testing would be to have a white family go and look at housing. No, they would do it the other way. Or they do it one of 2 ways. They send a white family out, they said, sure. Then they'd send a black family out and said, no houses available. Or the black family would go first and be rejected. And then the whites would go back and test it. So this is called redlining neighborhoods. So it turned out to be a red line neighborhood. And I didn't realize it until 2 years ago. I've lived here for 50 something years in this same house.
Wow. Okay.
And the 2 guys who came in have renovated every part of my house to keep it standing up and not falling over.
Right.
But when I moved here, the neighbor who lived next door, the first blacks who bought the house, lived next door to this house. It's a man named Ulysses K. Ulysses K was an eminent African-American classical composer whose work was performed with the New York Philharmonic. That was my neighbor. On the other side, my ex-husband is wandering in the backyard, and all the backyards are open. This beautiful African-American woman who's my next door neighbor walks over to him and says, "You're my professor of African-American history at City College." So that's the neighborhood that's the neighborhood we lived in.
Oh my goodness. You have shared so many insights with me, reminded me of things that I lost sight of, and I appreciate it and thank you. But I thank you so much for joining us for this hour. Now I always ask this one question to close out my interviews. The question is, did we leave anything out?
I was hoping that I would talk about having Gary as a student who I think is typical and very atypical of what City College can do for a person thirsty for knowledge. And how exceptional his exceptional life. When I mentioned to a colleague of mine, another teacher who loved Gary, who had him, that look what he's accomplished. And she was so proud to hear about that accomplishment because he was rescued. I feel I rescued him as a student when his mother was moving him from one town to another. She didn't have any understanding of American schools. And she's ready. And you know, as a person who went to high school in New York, you don't go and yank somebody out in the second half of your senior year to go to somewhere else.
Right.
She wanted to go to Queens and have him go to, I said, Gary, no, let her understand she has to finish. You have to finish your senior year. I think he came in the middle of his junior year. Gary taught himself English by watching TV when he was 9. His mother moved him from town to town to town. For all I know, he had been put in remedial classes because he didn't know English. He's the least remedial person I know. And so when he was in my AP English class, and he was reading Russian literature in English and other things, I mean, he was the kind of student everybody wishes to have because he drank it up. He was just swallowing knowledge. And when he went to City College, he would write to me. And this is really a role model for immigrant children and for yourself, as you could understand. He didn't take just 4 classes. He took 7. And he kept trying to add work on and to add learning on. And he had 3 majors when he finished up. I don't even know how he breathed.
Wow. Okay.
So his story, you know, how did he invent city tutors? How did he come up with this? It's very far away in some respects from what I thought. His mother wanted him to go to Brewer College and learn economics or whatever. And this is what he did.
Well, I'm going to be interviewing him in a couple of weeks to commemorate the 10th anniversary of the City Tutors. I always applaud him because I'm a serial entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for the last 3 decades. And, rarely does a business survive its first 2 years, let alone get to 10. So, and hitting the 10-year, the milestone of 10 years is it's definitely a celebratory moment in the world of business, in the world of independent business, entrepreneurship. So yeah, I'm gonna dig in and I'm gonna get answers that I'm asking questions that he probably has never been asked. But yeah, him and I, we really hit it off in the time that I've been working for the company. But enough about him. This is about you, Alice. Thank you so much for your time. I'm gonna ask in advance for part 2 interview.
Absolutely. You asked me questions that could not be answered with short answers.
Yes.
But also, I'm known for being wordy, so it's my fault.
No, I absolutely loved it. And I appreciate you so much. And thank you so much.
I want to tell you before you go how articulate you are, how beautifully you speak.
Thank you.
You are a master of speech, and it's a pleasure to listen to you.
Well, thank you. My mother would be proud. I know she's smiling. She's smiling up there right now. Alice, it was such a pleasure. Oh, my goodness. It was such a pleasure to meet you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.